What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs. Cheer.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This has Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm joined by a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Black Catz, social engineer. Good evening, Black Catz.
Good evening.
How's it going, brother? How are you?
It's pretty all right. Just winding down the day.
All right, good to go. Hey, where did you get the name Black Catz? Like, how did that come about?
Actually, it's a pretty funny story. About 10 years ago, when I first started getting into the internet, I came across a website called moid.org, and I wanted to go with Black Cat as the name. And
What
it turns out
moid.org? What is
it
that
is
website?
basically the worst shithole of the internet. It actually doesn't even exist anymore. It's just a picture of a goat next to the sea, to give you any idea.
Goat next to the sea. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
So, you chose that name because that just came to you when you were registering for the site?
Yeah, I felt like doing that, and then it turns out that Black Cat was taken, so I just added a Z at the end.
Outstanding. You know, Black Cat is actually the name of basically Japan's UPS.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Kuroneko, and it means black cat, and they have like this icon of a little black cat. Like, I don't know, it's pretty cool. But people often in the West associate a black cat, with bad luck, right?
I mean, I can be quite a bit of bad luck depending on which side of the coin you're on.
Yeah,
but...
right, exactly. People don't want to rub you the wrong way, unless they face the fury of the black cat. Now,
it does happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into too many specifics, but what about I want to bring this up before we get to our topic that we want to discuss today, namely economic models and how they pertain to governments. But you're an avid chess player, is that correct?
Yeah, I am a big fan.
Now, are you like grandmaster status? Like, are you like more just like, I don't know, amateur level? Or are you actually a ranking chess master?
I mean, I'm no master, but I can do games up to about 2,000 ELO. So.
What does that mean, 2,000 ELO?
So basically, chess players they have this ranking system currently, anyways, that uses an ELO system, which ranks from right around 1,600 or so as the average starting point, and then based on who you compete with, you either rank up or rank down, and based on how many times you competed with them. So, like, say you're a master chess player going up against an amateur, you're not going to get as many ELO points if you win. But if you're an amateur and you go up against a master and kick their butt, you're going to get a whole crap load of ELO. And that basically, over time, determines where you are in terms of how you play chess. It's
so fascinating. It's so fascinating to me because it's like a living ranking system. Like, you're ranked based on, you're ranked against like other living players that are actually alive, and this is like an unbroken chain of ranking that stretches back through time immemorial, perhaps even to like the advent of the game itself, or when they started ranking people. It's similar for Go. Do you play Go at all?
No, I haven't played Go since my childhood. That's more than 12 years ago.
That's a pretty cool childhood that you were able to play Go.
Yeah, I mean, I got a few rounds of it in, but it's not exactly one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, definitely.
It's too bad.
Well, I think it has a learning curve to it, and it doesn't have like the allure in that it's not as structured or as like forthright as chess is. Like chess, like the rules are very, very much like, you know, everything's like there. It's like, okay, these pieces do these, like they have these moves, and everything abides by a certain logic. But in Go, it's like much more amorphous. It's like difficult to really
Yeah, it's a different kind of abstract strategy game. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, you got to look at patterns and you have to follow a set of rules. All of the units are basically the same.
Right.
It's what the structure is. So it's different in that the structure for that sort of Eastern abstract strategy game, it relies on how formations are rather than the specific abilities of each piece that this chess does.
Exactly. And like what really counts in Go, what constitutes a point, is not necessarily the end state of one piece. Like in chess, you have the king, but actually like how much territory you're actually controlling, and then secondary to that, how many captured enemy pieces you have. But
Yeah.
that's kind of a cool like a short side convo on. We could get deeper into game theory. I know you're familiar with game theory, and as a social engineer, like this plays significantly into
Oh yeah.
into that craft, right? And I'd like to pick your brain on social engineering a little bit later, but for the topic of discussion, I'd like to discuss systems of or economic systems and how they inform governments. And you have kind of a compelling argument for a brand of communism, or like how do you brand it exactly?
Well, so I basically look at communism as its most base thing. I cut all the crap out, all of the extra stuff in the Communist Manifesto about the current state of the system as of the Industrial Revolution. And I look at it according to the egalitarian principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need.
Well, what can you break that down for us? What does the egalitarian principle really mean?
So it basically states that if you have like an ability or a craft or some way of producing for a society, that should go to other people who have needs, and they in turn will produce their own things, and it will go to you or the people around you based on those needs. It basically focuses on needs before wants.
Okay, all right. And what about if you want something in that society? Like, where does want play? Because obviously it has to factor in. Like, if I want a new video game, like, is that a need, or how is that fulfilled?
Well, there are several ideas on how to fill that. There are credit systems, but that seems a little more akin to capitalism. Um, Basically, the way I look at it is the long view. It is once we have fulfilled everyone's needs, once things like starvation and
Right.
like poverty and people living out on the streets are eliminated,
Right.
we'll start having more room for things like wants, and people will be able to have those things because everyone will be producing instead of having like a section of the population that's unemployed that can vary based on how the economy's going.
Right. That's kind of engineered to be unemployed too. It's kind of fucked up how like poverty is
Exactly.
kind of like written into the system as a necessary thing to fulfill some kind of I don't even know what, but I get that impression. So what you're advancing, it sounds to me like some kind of like economy that would exist like in Star Trek. Like, what is the Star Trek economy, I guess, going out? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Yeah,
Is
that'd be more like a resource-based economy. It all counts on how much matter or antimatter you have, and the other, various things, because everything's made out of energy or matter, and so you can convert between the two. And so they focus on taking various materials, deuterium or whatever, and converting it into matter using their special machines. So it's sort of like 3D printing, except way more advanced.
Right. We're talking about like actually printing on like the atomic level.
Yeah, using energy itself.
Yeah,
So it gets to the matter energy conversions.
there are still so that's like an energy based or resource based economy, but there's still a credit system, isn't there, in Star Trek, or is it not that way at all?
Well, actually, it's usually not that way unless they're low on resources. Like if you ever watched Voyager, everyone was on a credit system at that point because they were running on energy that side of the galaxy had no idea how to fulfill, and they were on the run. They had no industry around them, so they basically had to make it work, and so they started rationing energy in the form of energy credits.
I'm not familiar with the plot of Voyager. I did watch it, but was this like the Voyager ship was a special class of ship that was like akin to the Mayflower or something, and it was
Yeah.
just
It was basically a special kind of science vessel, and its purpose was to chart some nebula. And along the way, some Cardassians showed up and were like, you know what, we're going to punk your shit. And so the Voyager chases that ship into a nebula, which just so happens to have a wormhole, right in it. And they get launched into another quadrant of the galaxy and have to find their way home over the course of generations.
I love the fact that the antagonists are the Cardassians, like, which is so closely, like, phonetically similar to the Kardashians. I think that's great, just in general. But moving on. So the communism, the brand of communism that you are talking about is what? Communist revisionism? Like, is it reform communism? Like,
yeah, sort of.
People. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I would just want to, like, how do you address the fact that when people encounter the term communism, they instantly have, like, this almost knee-jerk reaction, either by virtue of the fact that, they were brought up in the United States where we kind of had committed ourselves to this, like, aversion early on after World War II, that we were kind of diametrically, ethically, or ideologically opposed to it. Like, how do you deal with, or how would you address people who say, like, who would have this instant, like, almost like uncanny valley, like, repulsive reaction to the word, even communism?
I'd point out that capitalism has very similar flaws outright. I mean, the whole issue was it was East versus West, and at the end of World War II, we had Germany, which was being divided up and conquered, and the whole time we were finding all this cool shit. We're like, oh wow, we need to grab this shit up. We're importing scientists from there. But so was the East, because they wanted their share of it too, because they participated, right?
Yeah, in the West, I think it was called Project Paperclip. That was the effort to bring them in. Yeah, so.
And so basically, at the same time, Stalin was doing the same thing, except he was way more paranoid. He was a backstabbing, cutthroat son of a bitch, and I think that's probably most of the reason why people kind of associate communism with him, is because it's like, oh yeah, everyone knows Stalin. He's basically the Hitler of communism.
Now, was Stalin a communist?
I wouldn't say so. He basically took what Lenin was doing in Russia and just destroyed it.
Lenin was socialist, right?
He was a communist, but he was what you'd call a Marxist-Leninist. He had his own kind of flavor, as everyone does. It's kind of akin to capitalism in some regards, in that there are different kinds of capitalism that you can have, free market versus more of a socialist sort of capitalism.
Right. Are there? Here's the question: has communism ever been achieved in the world?
I mean, aside from a couple of small communes that were in France at one point before they got wrecked.
Are these like
really.
In the Basque regions? Were they communist or?
I am not exactly familiar with where they were geographically, other than that I know that they were working on it in France.
Is there a hierarchy of like of rulership, or of like, how does that work? How does anarchism inform communism? In the sense that in anarchy you have no rulers, but in communism, are there elected rulers? Is it literally by the community? Like,
Exactly.
What is it? Is it a democracy? Like,
well, I mean, you can because it is an economic sort of thing. You can basically have any sort of government with it, really. And in the case of, say, good old Russia, they went with a dictatorship, and so did a lot of other countries, which is kind of unfortunate, because while it's supposed to be a dictatorship of the proletariat, the problem was the governments not only owned the means of production, they also controlled the means of production, which means that the proletariat were not in control of it. They had their fair share. Everyone owned a share of the state,
right,
in the theory, but they didn't have control over it. So they had things like the Politburo in Russia that determined what was done with resources.
Right, and you had the same division of classes that you see in capitalism, where you have inevitably the haves and the have-nots. It seems to
Yep.
me like communism, in its purest form, has yet to be realized, and where it has been implemented, it's kind of given the entire system of thought a bad name because, well, like you said, it was implemented by dictatorships, and dictatorships aren't the best. They aren't the best vehicles for, I don't know, promoting a system of thought or economic system or what have you.
Well, I guess that's sort of a question of what's a good dictator. I mean,
True.
while Lenin had his faults in terms of sort of shoving religion off to the side and burning churches and exiling religious leaders, he did increase industry. He increased the rate of production in farming. He increased schooling in terms of education. He was actually bringing the country around to the modern era from literally an agricultural state.
What happened to Lenin? I mean, he ended up in Mexico City, right? Wasn't he assassinated there?
Nah, that was Trotsky.
That was Trotsky.
Yeah, he was supposed to be the gentleman that would follow up Lenin, and even Lenin expressed his doubts towards Stalin. But at that point, Lenin's power was declining, his health was declining. There are reports that he had neurosyphilis, but it could have just as well have been old age. Yeah, right. Went to his head.
Nietzsche had neurosyphilis, didn't he? I think he died of neurosyphilis, actually.
I am not familiar with how he died, but it would be kind of funny if that were the case.
Yeah. So we have this we have communism by dictatorship. Now, Lenin himself was a dictator.
Absolutely, but he was one that tried to listen to the people.
Okay, so maybe like what's the term for that? A beneficial dictator? I forget what it is. Like.
A good leader, I'd say. It reminds me of Josip Broz Tito of former Yugoslavia. He managed to hold the country together.
Who is Joseph? What's his last name?
Tito.
Oh, Tito. Okay,
Yeah.
right. And he was dictator of Yugoslavia that attempted to hold the country together. This was post World War II, right?
Yeah, it was towards the end, or the end of World War II, but it was also during it, I think, a little bit. I'm not exactly sure on the chronology of it.
When did the breakup of the Yugoslav Republic happen?
Shortly after Tito died.
Right.
And which is kind of shitty because he even held Yugoslavia up against Stalin. Stalin wanted Yugoslavia to do this, that, and the other thing. He was like, nope, fuck you, and proceeded to do what he wanted, and he flaunted it in front of the entire world while he was at it.
Was the Yugoslav Republic part of the USSR?
I mean, it was a satellite country, and it did sort of count as part of it, but Tito ran shit his own way.
Right, exactly. This is the same argument that's made against Ho Chi Minh, which was people were like, well, no, we can't let Vietnam fall to the commies because then what's going to happen is there's going to be like this domino effect. We need to fight them there. But what people didn't realize was that Ho Chi Minh didn't give a fuck about the Soviet Union or the Soviet Empire or the USSR. He only wanted what was good for his people. But unfortunately, through our just sheer stubbornness, I think, we were unable to effect a diplomatic resolution. It was like, just because this country is communist doesn't mean that, we have to be so vehemently opposed to them. We can still agree with people that we disagree. We can still affect diplomatic or civil resolutions to things with people we don't agree with.
Yeah, that was basically the anti-expansionist policy of the United States and its allies, so basically NATO. They wanted to slow the spread of communism as much as they possibly could. And it's because it was catching on in a lot of those countries because they were already communal countries in terms of their history.
Yeah, we see this in South America as well, right? I mean, I think maybe now today, is it only Venezuela? They can't be the only communist country. I'm pretty sure that's not true in South America.
Yeah, in South America. I don't even think they're that communist anymore. Anyways, the CIA, with the help of several other government entities, was running a sort of secret campaign down there. At least it was secret back in the day, up against Che Guevara and his lads. And they ended up winning and put Che in front of a firing squad. And since then, he's been a martyr.
Well, what do you think about the historical person that is Che Guevara? Because I've seen it from two different perspectives. One, that he was a freedom fighter. Two, that he was basically just like a rich guy's son who killed homosexuals and things of that nature. Like, what? Who was Che as a person?
I'd say he was basically the baller of communism. He well, he did have certain past to him. He kind of rejected that to an extent and went and started fighting for the people on behalf of the people. He started out in Cuba, and eventually, after that got bogged down, he was shipped over to South America, and basically he spread communism throughout various regions just by sheer traveling around, spreading the good word of communism, as it were, and sometimes having to fight on the battlefield up against CIA spooks that were sent down there to stop expansion.
This was in South America, or this was in because he was active in Africa as well, right?
Yeah, but to a limited extent. I mean, he was active all around the world. He was up at the UN in New York a couple of times while he was still wearing his, trademark green fatigues and that beret of his.
Right. Do you feel like, as historical characters go, that there is a certain grayness, that is to say that there is a certain, like, I don't know, ultimately human quality to these people, where they aren't the the Jesuses or the Hitlers that we make them out to be? That in fact, actually, they're deeply flawed, as well as they are incredibly I don't know what to say, incredibly influential, I guess, positively so.
Yeah. I would say so. I mean, that's the case with all people, really. Everyone's a human. Everyone suffers the human condition, or enjoys it anyway.
Yeah.
And from that, we try and come up with our own way of living. If it works and we think it's good, we try and spread it to others. I think a lot of what the issue is that we kind of look at them as historical figures rather than as the humans that they are.
Right,
And
yeah.
so we kind of hit them with the psychology of warfare, where we use the words of war, where we try and distance them from being human. But then, like, at the end of it, Shay got all shot up by a whole bunch of CIA folks, and they thought it would be a good idea to take a picture of him, and it only made him human again. The fact that they killed him, they put him in a fucking building and took pictures of him and just sent them around the world. It's just it totally backfired on them.
Right. Where was he killed? Was he killed in Cuba? Was he killed?
He was definitely in South America at the time. I think it was it was Venezuela. Yeah, no, it was Colombia. I believe. He basically got surrounded. The police there were working with the CIA at the time, and they basically found out his location and sent a task force to get him. And he was outnumbered and was one of the last fellows to go down. And upon his capture, he said his last words, and they proceeded to shoot him while he was tied to a pole.
What were his last words? Do you know?
I believe it was something along the lines of "Hasta la victoria siempre," which roughly translates to "onward to victory forever."
Wow.
Famous last words, right?
Pretty significant there. Yeah. What? Have you seen the Netflix show Narcos?
No, I have not.
Narcos is set in Colombia and details the saga of I want to say Che Guevara now, but it's not Che Guevara. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. Pablo Escobar.
I've heard about him.
Yeah, right. He was a significant figure in Colombia in the late 70s through the 80s, I think up to the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken. But he was integral to basically cocaine trade, right? Moving cocaine from farms and processing areas in Colombia.
Basically a drug lord.
Basically a drug lord, right? But had this remarkably kind of almost it was strange. Like he is kind of the birth child of where capitalism and communism collide. There emerges a figure like Pablo Escobar, and that he was a man of the people. He was very proud of this, having grown up in poor in I think it was Medellin, Colombia, and kind of working his way up until he emerged as this drug lord, moving the cocaine, and he would do a lot of things. He was making like something like on order of $6 million a day from the drug trade, and was just making a lot of money. And he was donating a lot of that money to Colombia to repair roads in Medellin and build schools and hospitals and churches and so on and so forth. And yet, at the same time, like he is the capitalist's capitalist. You know what I mean? Like he
black market capitalist.
Black market capitalist, right? And you just have to wonder, like, is there room for capitalism within a communist society? Is it possible, even just given human nature and given our technological failures, to affect a communist society?
Well, I believe it's definitely possible. I mean, one of the examples of communism was that they set up a computer essentially to run the economy, and it basically allotted things according to what was needed on a regular basis.
Right.
But communism was on the downward spiral at the time, and so it was just no good. They shut it down, and while it did work successfully during the time that it was implemented, it wasn't used since then. And I mean, communism is supposed to be a transitionary period anyways. It's supposed to be people of capitalism are wage slaves. They are not being treated as they should. We have these huge class warfare, so we implement communism as a revolutionary tactic to bring everyone down to an equal economic level, or everyone up to an equal economic level.
Right.
And it's supposed to transition into socialism after things have stabilized.
I
but
see.
determining.
So socialism is the end state goal, then.
Yes.
See, that's the thing. Like, it seemed to like never really get there. Even in communist society, you just ended up having class distinctions where you're wondering, wait a minute, China's supposed to be communist, right? But there are haves and have-nots. If your family is part of the committee, or in the government, or I guess in Russia that would be the Politburo. If they're there, then they are connected. Then you're going to get the nicer car, the nicer house, so on and so forth. Like, there was still this distinction happening.
Yeah, it reminds me of a friend of mine, my very first philosophy professor, Peter Lepoux.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up in Romania, so he was the son of a slightly influential politician with the Politburo, and one of the things that his father would always do is he would always take the smaller eggs or the smaller chickens or whatever, because it worked sort of as a line of succession. As it went down, people got first picks and first dibs. But he was always about implementing communism. He believed in communism, and so he would always try and give the better stuff to the people that were further down the line.
Right. Yeah, that's honorable. Unfortunately, given human nature, it would seem that, maybe I can't say that most people wouldn't, but I mean, I'm speaking from a capitalist background, that most people would, not do that. People would take the larger eggs. But, that's neither here nor there. But so that's honorable. I mean, that's the thing. If people can be trusted to enforce the communist ideal, even in something as insignificant as picking the size of the egg that is given to them, then I think it succeeds, or it has room for success. But when it's faced with, I think, I hate to be kind of cynical with it, but when faced with, like, I don't know, I think what we have here are two diametrically opposed notions of what human nature is, almost like.
Exactly, because there are some people who are charitable and there are some people who are greedy.
Right, exactly. And it would just so happen that, I mean, historically we would look at capitalists as being, you know, kind of the more greedy ones, looking to get over on their fellow man, whereas the communists, you would assume that they would kind of do right by their fellow man and, you know, give them the larger egg, as it were.
Well, and just the same as in capitalism. I mean, capitalism can be a good thing. I mean, look at what Bill Gates did with his money. He proceeded to just shove it out into society in the best ways he knew how. He just was like, I'm going to take raw sewage and turn it into clean water and drink it on camera. I'm going to open a high school for children who are extremely gifted, and I am going to give them the tools that they need to succeed like I did.
Yeah, he's taking on big challenges, like clean water for everyone on the planet, or like you said, what was the other one? He's like combating diseases. He's like, I want to eliminate Lyme disease, or like I want to eliminate malaria.
And because he has billions and billions to do it with, he just proceeds to do it in the best way he knows how. He gets a think tank together. He gets them to be like, what is the most efficient way we can do this? Who are the people that you know that can do this? And then he funds it.
Right. That's pretty badass, right? So there is a saving grace in capitalism, given the fact that if you have a beneficent capitalist, like, actually some pretty cool, incredible things can happen as a result of that. What do you make of the apparent failure of communism, though, like, given the world stage? So the internet emerged from the United States, itself a capitalist nation. What do you make of that that asymmetry? Why, if communism was the ideal, why haven't, like, the automobile or the internet, why didn't they emerge from the Soviet Union?
Well, that's actually a really good question. I mean, and it kind of goes to how they approach science. Like, this can be seen in their rocket program. The United States was like, well, instead of wasting tons of resources, we're going to go with things like miniaturization, and through that, they were able to use less expensive things, smaller rockets, and they were basically using their resources more efficiently. But with the communists over there, they didn't have things like that going on. And I think that is due in part to what happened in Operation Paperclip. If everyone was sharing knowledge with each other instead of trying to compete with each other across a global sort of economy and sort of war zone even, we would probably have seen the internet spread through all of those nations very quickly. It could have been that it was just frivolous. It can be something as simple as bureaucracy. I mean, the United States had DARPA, and they were like, we're going to experiment in a way of networking computers with each other. And so after the military was like, wow, this is cool, a lot of colleges and universities started spreading it because they had access to these materials. And I do think that was in part due to capitalism. They were a little more free in terms of how they were able to allocate resources on an individualistic basis rather than a collective one.
You were also dealing with a much smaller population at the time, I think, the United States versus the USSR. Like, at the height of the USSR, like, you're not just talking about the population of Russia. You're talking about the combined populations of Russia, Yugoslavia, the Ukraine, the Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan, like, all
everything.
Everything, right?
Well, and one of the things that I think was a failing, and on Khrushchev's part, during de-Stalinization, is he wanted to export communism to the satellite countries, and he wanted to export Russian sort of values. He was trying to get Russian taught in schools outside of Russia, so that they had that as a language, so that they didn't have to deal with that barrier. of translation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the priorities that they had were a little crazy and a little a little frivolous, because they could have just as well have spent that on better things like bettering the education systems that were already in place,
Right.
bettering the industry that was already in place, instead of trying to put up a bunch of statues and calling it communism.
Right, right, exactly. I'm curious to know like how the transfer of wealth happens, whereby you have the satellite Soviet states, and like is that money all paid toward the central bank in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and then it's
Actually,
redistributed? Like,
yes, it was. It was an entire focus on Russia. Russia always had first dibs and always called first dibs too. And if any of the surrounding countries had an issue with it, they were just like, nah. And they
yeah,
had the power and authority to do so, which is part of the reason why when things finally went to shit in right around 89, 91,
yeah.
it was going to shit really, really hard
Right, yeah, exactly. It took a nosedive almost, and then like
because everyone was
overnight,
ready.
yeah,
Yep.
everyone was just fed up with the bread lines and the and probably the sense that, like you said, like Russians are getting first dibs. So I'm not sure how the breakup of the USSR happened, whether or not like Ukraine divested themselves first, or if that was uh, precipitated by the breakup of the Yugoslav Republic, or like how that
Oh,
happened.
Ukraine had it hard though. They had Chernobyl happen to them, and the people back in Russia, back in Moscow, were saying, "Well, we need to cover this up." As the reactor is sitting there burning,
Oh
and a
my God.
parade of 50,000 people are just sitting there having a stroll through the parade grounds there, as this graphite reactor is just sitting there spewing out toxic crap.
Right. Yeah, that definitely would serve. If I was Ukrainian, I would definitely be fed up with the bullshit, because
Yeah.
that was a Soviet reactor. I mean, that was Russian engineering, right? That
Yes.
built that. So
Hmm.
yeah, I could see that would definitely piss me the fuck off if I had that going on in my backyard. So, okay, so here we are now, 50 years later,
Yep.
and we're looking at the world as it exists. Going into the future, do you for what do you how how would you apprehend a world in which the vast majority of the production jobs are automated? Okay, these are robots that are
Hmm.
making everything. How does that change or inform communism, or is there a brand or a flavor of communism that is compatible with capitalism, in the sense that there is room for, little Johnny with his lemonade stand, and he can save up to buy his video game that he wants? Like how do you foresee the future, and how does communism inform that future insofar as economic systems are concerned?
Well, so that's a tricky one, and that's something that I'd address using capitalism first. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, as it is currently, robots tend to replace jobs and are seen as sort of a negative in that they take away from, Bob and Joe
Right.
with their industry jobs, and
Right.
it makes it harder for them to work. But the idea behind it is it's supposed to not just replace jobs, but get rid of the shitty jobs that no one wants to do.
Right. The dangerous jobs.
Yes, dangerous jobs, smelly jobs, jobs that are just best left to machines, really.
Yeah.
And from that, you can have options to open up better jobs for those people. And all you have to really do is invest in them and retrain them.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, as it stands currently, we're a little more individualistic, so it makes it difficult to do that because everyone's looking out for number one. They don't
Right.
care about the people who are being let off as much. Um, and that ends up hurting them. What I think should happen is that they should be, I hate to say it, re-educated because it sounds, yeah,
Clockwork
uh,
Orange strapped in with a
very,
forceps on their eyes so they can
yeah.
be deprogrammed as coal miners and reprogrammed as computer programmers.
Well, to an extent, yeah. But I think also as some of the people are not going to be able to learn new jobs as easily, I
Mm.
think that they should have a certain sort of grace period, or be given a second chance to relearn the trade of their choice, because their jobs have just been, well, taken away by machines.
Is here's kind of a curveball. I don't want to break you up in mid thought though. Do you want to finish that?
Oh no, that's all right.
What about no jobs?
Yeah, that's actually one that I've always found a little bit fascinating. So it would be along the lines of sort of going back to the Star Trek thing. Everyone is basically a philosopher or an artist. It opens up new doors for people to be able to pursue the things that they want to do instead of the things that they need to do.
Right. Vocation versus occupation.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
something that you use your time to do, more like a hobby or a craft or something.
Or advancing ethics and philosophy.
Right, exactly. Exactly. That itself, I think, is not really as appreciated as I think it should be. Neither is it remunerated. There are very few jobs. It seems like philosophers always, unless you're like, you know, a Zizek or a Derrida, or, you know, some like really high-level academic, you're not getting paid for your philosophy degree or whatever. It's very hard for philosophers to get paid. In fact, they often have to take on other jobs to kind of masquerade in order to for the system to have an excuse to remunerate them, which I think is bullshit.
I agree. It's a sad waste, and it's something that reflects in college courses. I've noticed that locally around here, most of the classes for philosophy are starting to get trimmed off and replaced by things that are less quality of knowledge, more, you know, we're doing this so that you can get a job.
Right, yeah, exactly. I heard two stories recently. One was that there was a presidential candidate recently who decreed, "Oh, we need more welders." I think it was Rubio. Marco Rubio said, "We need more welders and fewer philosophers." And someone came out with the statistics that showed actually that philosophers make on average more money than welders do. His reasoning was that, you know, people need good paying jobs. So they need to study a trade like welding more so than they need to study philosophy. And my point is that, no, we need philosophical welders. And
sort of a combination of the two.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like we need people, we need thinking people, we need the competent man. That Heinlein quote, where a man needs to be able to change a tire, plan a war, cook a tasty meal, change a diaper. Specialization is for insects. We need Renaissance people, men and women, and that can do welding. That's fucking awesome. We definitely need welders, but we need to promote, I don't know, a more intellectual population that isn't so afraid of being intellectual. That's the problem I think America has today, is that there is this anti-intellectualism where it's like, how dare you use those big words? When I was in the Marine Corps, I didn't give a fuck. I would use big words. My whole philosophy is drown them in intelligence. Eventually, they'll learn how to swim. We shouldn't set up these blocks where we're like, oh no, it's a multi-syllabic word. We shouldn't use that. It's not cool. That's too smarty pants. Like, why are you doing that? Like, I think that's dumb. We shouldn't be advancing that type of society, that type of philosophy.
Well, and it's reasonable to see why it's happening. People don't like having to put the effort into knowledge. They would rather go out and enjoy their life or do some other thing.
Completely
but I mean,
understandable.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think that they should like point at the person who's trying to do that and be like, nerd.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like really, are we really there?
If you look at the history of how things have been going in terms of the world, we came up with the atomic bomb before we figured out that torture wasn't a good idea. You know what I mean?
Fucked up is that?
We came up with it and we used it, thinking that it was ethical to do so, even though we had just got done firebombing Tokyo.
Oh, we firebombed the shit out of Tokyo. More people died in the firebombing of Tokyo than both Nagasaki and Hiroshima combined.
I believe it, and that's because white phosphorus is one nasty thing.
Yeah, it's fucking nasty.
If I never saw that shit again, it'd be too soon.
I'm not. Was it white phosphorus or was it kerosene? I don't know what they did, but they set that entire fucking city on fire, and it's all made of wood, so it burned to a cinder.
Apparently, there's like reports of people who were actually sort of melted into the road.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that shit is just. It is. We still use it today. It's used in smoke ordnance and whatnot.
Yeah.
But we also use it sometimes on soft targets, and that's just the scare. Like, I would not want to be on the other end of any sort of incendiary, especially white phosphorus.
It burns underwater.
Yes. It just keeps burning.
Right. We had a number of white phosphorus. I believe there was white phosphorus, or it was like maybe it was just napalm. We had napalm bombs in our inventory, and they have like you have to add gasoline to them, and then inside the container, the bomb unit, are a bunch of these like beads that have this chemical. I don't know what they are, and that turns in. I guess that's strictly napalm. Maybe it wasn't white phosphorus. We definitely had white phosphorus in our inventory too, though.
Usually mortars and shit like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's,
incendiary rounds, white phosphorus maybe.
It's the scariest shit, and those beads, you just add gasoline to them, and it basically thickens the gasoline and makes it so it sticks to shit. And
yeah, it's like petroleum jelly or something.
It's angry.
Yeah,
it's angry all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so we touched on ordinance. What was that? I mean, communism, the future. What else is there really?
Oh, so with regard to kind of attaining that society, we got to do a few things. We got to get people's heads out of politics. We got to get people's heads out of paid news. Like, I believe in PBS. I believe in the news hour. I fucking hate cable news. Cable news is the worst goddamn thing that ever happened.
Yeah, it's gross.
Because it's all people who have been underwritten to say stupid shit about things. And it's just like, well, now that we're done with the sad segment, here is a picture of a puppy who's riding a skateboard.
Right.
Fuck that shit, man.
Like, watch while we continue to mind fuck you until you're completely hypnotized and in our own sinoid rhythm, so that we can completely control your emotional state when we, deliver the follow-up headline, which invariably, if it's CNN, is Hillary Clinton is the savior. She is Mary, the mother of Jesus. She can do no wrong. She's Mother Teresa. It's disgusting to watch from the sidelines and seeing CNN, which is owned by Time Warner, and Time Warner is one of Hillary. I think they gave her like $200,000 to like $500,000 in donations or something like that. Like, it's ridiculous. It's like absurd. And then you're wondering, okay, why aren't they giving Bernie any airtime? Why aren't they like talking about all of these massive rallies that Bernie has had around the country, where he's dwarfing Hillary's rallies by several orders of magnitude? And then it's like, you look at where the money's going, it's like, it's obvious why. It's because they own her. They bought and paid her.
Exactly. Yeah, when I look at the elections these days, I don't look at Democrat or Republican anymore. I look at a couple of corporatist assholes that have a difference in values. Right? Like, some of them say, oh, we support guns and we hate gays, right? And then the other side's like, well, we embrace those things. But at the same time, they are both shoving the money down your throat. And that's one of the major reasons why we got to get money out of politics, because it excludes the little guy.
We got to get
the little
money
guy.
out of politics.
Exactly. You got to get things like Citizens United to bail.
Yeah.
That's got to go.
It's got to go.
And you've got to do things like get rid of things along the lines of what's it called?
We have to put the Glass-Steagall Act back into play too. Like, it was Bill Clinton.
Yes, it was.
Who like canceled that law, right? Then there was some executive decision that was made where it was like that law no longer applies, and that had so much to do with destabilizing the economy and opening, deregulating Wall Street, to open us up to the financial collapse that we eventually got in 2008.
And not to peg a Democratic point, but that's apparently in part due to pressures from the Republican Party at the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, towards the end of Bill Clinton's years, his presidency, I mean, he was just under siege. Remember, like, they were to impeach him, and then, like, the Monica Lewinsky thing broke, and then fucking
It was a mess.
Yeah, it was a fucking bloody mess, and he needed to do something, presumably, to still the waters, as it were. But I mean, in so doing, he betrayed the
everyone.
Yeah, he betrayed everyone. He betrayed the camouflage on the I can't really put words to it, but the ultimate like conspiracy that's being hatched, and I hate to sound conspiratorial, but really is being hatched against the American people, where it's like we have this illusion of difference, right? We see Republicans and Democrats. There's the illusion of dichotomy there, of two different voices, two different ideas. But at the end of the day, they're slapping each other on the backs. They're laughing it up and drinking their bourbon and their scotch, smoking their cigars in the back room. Mm-hmm. They don't give a fuck about you. Maybe
because
Bernie
their money is being lined, or their pockets are being lined with money.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas maybe with Bernie, maybe you don't get that so much. Maybe with someone like Rand Paul, you don't get that so much. My ideal is if Bernie and Rand Paul could put their I don't know, their what do you call it? Their financial, their economic philosophies, their economic philosophical differences behind them, and kind of put the business of the American people on the front burner. I think that would be so awesome.
That would be ideal. It would be. It's because mostly they are focusing on libertarianism.
Right.
They are focusing. I mean, Bernie focuses a little bit more on the economic side, which I think is a good thing because, like I said, two corporatist assholes aren't very good choices. Right. But I also like the dynamic that they both bring in, that they are libertarians and that they want liberty come hell or high water.
Right, exactly. They are the left and the right wing of the libertarian movement, and I would love to see a libertarian fucking president get fucking elected. I think it would do wonders for this country. Instead, we get the corporate lip service, bought and paid for puppets on strings in Hillary, or I mean, let's be honest, Trump. He might not be bought and paid for, but do you think he gives a fuck about the middle class after he gets elected?
I don't think he gave a fuck about him before it.
No.
What he is a professional shit talker. He is basically one of the distractions that the Republican Party offered up while they were trying to figure out who they're going to run that will actually be viable.
Yeah. I know that we promised not to get into the election, but we're nearing the top of the hour. I thank you very much, Black Catz, for coming on the program.
Absolutely.
We want to have you back on in the future if you're down.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I look forward to it.
Black Catz, social engineer, thank you very much for being on the program. If you were educated or entertained by this podcast, please click the PayPal link and donate. We're completely out of pocket, and as we live in this capitalist society, we have bills that we have to pay. So please, do us a favor, help us out, donate to the cause, and we would appreciate it. Do you have anything to promote, Black Catz?
Nothing other than, go out there and do your thing,
Yeah, all right.
Try not to be an asshole while you're doing it, but, if you see one, be an asshole.
yeah, exactly. Right? I mean, that's good guidance, I think. We have to continue to look forward to the future and find a way to resolve these issues, and as long as we don't abandon reason to the point where, someone like a Bernie Sanders and a Rand Paul could sit down and have a conversation. I think Rand Paul recently had invited Bernie to a debate to talk about these issues, but Bernie had to sign Hillary Clinton backed, because she owns the DNC, and in order for Bernie to get into the debates, he had to agree to their fucking contract, which made it illegal for him to seek a debate that wasn't sanctioned by the DNC.
Well, yeah, and we've all seen the tapes 1,000 times, but I think when you get into politics, once you start seeing it for what it is. Once started, there's no going back, and you have to go in with both eyes open.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, wide open. So, as long as, like I said, the two extremes can find a way, that two extremes being like Bernie and a Rand Paul, or communism and capitalism, as long as we don't abandon reason, I think we'll be fine as a species. But we have a ways to go, and we're definitely not. We're definitely in the woods. We're very much in the woods right now. So it'll take a little while before we get out. But
Well, once started, there's no going back.
there you go. All right. Outstanding. Thanks again very much, Black Catz, and we'll check you all next time. World peace.